Good evening, everyone. I'm Judy Fisk. I am calling the Rules Committee meeting to order. It's Monday, October 1st, 2018. It is 6:08 p.m. We do have a quorum. First thing we're going to do is have citizen comment. We have 4 folks signed up, so they'll each get 3 minutes apiece. The first one, if you would come up, is Ndona Nyomo, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Yes, oh, good.
This is my first time being here.
Well, welcome, we're happy you're here. If you would just state your name for the record.
Sure, my name is Ndona Nyomo. And I just had a question. I'm assuming that you guys are going to go more into detail once you reach to the area regarding where is it exactly? The city council rules to allow board, commission, and committee members with expired terms to continue serving. So my question regarding that is that prior to the expiration of their terms, would there not be ample time for a new replacement to be made? And if not, is there a reason why they would be allowed to continue on at that point if, say, for example, the constituents of that neighborhood or area or ward would prefer that someone else replace them at that time?
Okay, we'll take that as part of the discussion when that item comes up.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Mary Beth Burns.
Hi there. Mary Beth Burns. I'm sure you guys are tired of hearing from me, so I will try to make this brief. There are 3 things I'd like to touch on tonight. I'm going to start backwards with item number 12, which is the conflict of interest on separate committees. I just would like to comment that as a small business owner who is the only person in my small business who does work here in the city and needs to be able to represent themselves in front of various boards and committees. I think that conflict of interest presents an undue burden on those of us who give our time freely to the city on whatever boards we serve on. And I think that it's difficult to have somebody else advocate for you when you know that you are your own best advocate. And so having me have to hire somebody to represent me in front of other boards is an undue burden, in my opinion. Number 2 is going back to item 11, which is allowing the boards and commissions committee member to continue with an expired term until a replacement is met. I can answer your question. Being on Zoning Board of Appeals, we often have an incredibly difficult time finding additional members. And so for many months, we were without a quorum because we didn't have that extra member. So in this case, there was nobody who would step up, who wanted to be part of the board. And so keeping that member on is critical. And I think that's a key component. And last but not least, and I know I'm out of my 3 minutes, but if you'll give me a second here, the realignment of city boards, committees, and commissions. Combining ZBA and the Plan Commission, I think, is a really bad idea for a whole host of reasons. I've got more than my 3 minutes will allow, but it sort of goes, the gist is this, that you're really consolidating all this power from many people into the hands of many fewer people. And in a city like Evanston, where there are competing interests at every level, I think we run the risk of running into some trouble. I know that this works in some other communities that are smaller, like Des Plaines and other cities like that. But I think in Evanston, with its unique citizenry, I think that that's a mistake to try and combine those. I also think that you've got 2 completely different audiences, and so when you get a front yard setback coming in after a planned unit development in the same meeting, I think that you're going to run into problems with people complaining about what those meetings are like.
Okay, Mary Beth, can you bring
And
that
that's
up?
it. So thank you
Great.
very much.
Thank you. Misty Wittenberg?
Hi, Misty Wittenberg, 5th Ward. So just looking at the agenda list for this meeting, it's a little concerning. A lot of the items are not within the stated jurisdiction of this committee. Some of them are within councils, but not this committee as presented, especially not when items referred by staff. A lot of them give the appearance of encroaching on powers of independent branches of this government. That feels concerning. Some, because they're, it's difficult to look at this and not also see how a lot of these look like they're retaliating or giving some preemptive defense against issues that, and initiatives that residents have brought forward, have done on their own, that some members of this council have opposed. And that just doesn't feel great when public is engaging and participating, and where it feels like you guys are trying to, limit efforts being made to open up engagement or to, allow citizens to exercise their rights or, face punishment or strangely censure. So I'm asking you guys to proceed carefully as you move forward and look to resolve these issues in a more appropriate way, and also look to the jurisdiction of this committee, things like ensuring compliance with the Open Meetings Act. That is stated directly in this jurisdiction, and it's been totally ignored even when I brought those issues forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our last speaker, Doreen Price.
Hello. I know that combining things can be really good. I think it's better to be a matrix than it is to group everything together for the reasons that were really discussed prior to my input. I'm concerned that climate and energy is outside of the considerations of zoning and planning. And since many things, especially in this area, are interrelated in that regard, I'd like to see zoning put in a group that is dedicated, or a commission, or a group that's dedicated to having some harmony in the situation that we live in, the environment we live in. Economic vitality is all I see it is about jobs. I think that can be included in terms of health and well-being. I think health and well-being should be separate. Arts and recreation should be focusing on the things that are bringing, what do you call it? It's like poetry. It's like bringing the other part of yourself, the spiritual part of yourself, and the physical part of yourself into play. And national systems about the environment. Again, I don't see the focus as much as on plants as anything else. An Equity and Empowerment Commission should be probably even more powerful than it is right now. I think age-friendly task force and the Commission on Aging should all be part of that group, and not separated out. Human Services should actually have its own grouping, I think, because there's a lot of things that interrelate with regard to police and protection, which was not mentioned under protection or safety, but police and fire and the rest of the community that works with regard to people's well-being, and not necessarily, looking for the rules rather than the reasons and trying to come up with solutions. So I think this is an attempt to do something that it's not really doing, and that's my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That closes citizen comment. We'll go into the discussion of items. Before we do that, I'm obviously the new chair of the committee. I asked staff to send out a email to everyone if there's anything you wanted on the Rules Committee agenda to let us know. So I think we're probably up to date on everything on this agenda, which is a good place to start. The second thing, the second thing is that I'll just use a minute to make a reference to the Plan Commission on residential care facilities and whether or not correct classification of special use would be appropriate. So I just wanted to make sure that that referral was made this evening. So on our agenda for discussion is realignment of the city boards, committees, and commissions. Johanna, would you like to do presentation, our city manager?
And while she's coming up, Madam Chair, members of the committee, good evening. We are at the final stages of the preparation of the fiscal year 2019 proposed budget for your consideration. And a theme that has resonated with the city staff as we have worked over the last several months on the budget was the issue of the boards and commissions. This is something that's not a new subject before the Rules Committee. I think the number is now 45 boards, committees, and commissions that we have. And as we look at staffing resources, that we look at the connectiveness between the work of our boards and commissions, it really stood out during our budget discussions that there perhaps are better ways to focus the time not only of staff, but also our citizen board and commission members on the work that they do and making sure that work is meaningful. So Johanna really had taken on this assignment during her last maternity leave. So this has been, what, almost a year plus?
My toddler is 2.5, so.
So but the second one isn't quite that old.
7 months.
7 months. So this is at least a 8 or 10 month project that Johanna's been working on, and I wanted to share it. We are coming here with the understanding that this is not something that would be done overnight. But as we go into budget discussions, we felt that tonight was an appropriate time to raise these issues, get some initial feedback. We're not asking for any action, but really to kind of share with you our thinking, because as we look at the budget, not only for 2019, but in future years, we need to have more connectiveness between the various parts of the city government to really meet the council's goals and the community's goals. And we really see a vibrant board and commission system as being a real key point to that. So, Madam Chair, with those initial comments, Johanna Leonard, our Community Development Director. Good evening.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the Rules Committee. So that while I covered quite a bit of this, I think whenever I did this, I counted 43. So I hope we haven't added 2 since then, or maybe we have, and I didn't count 1 correctly. But we're in the 40s in terms of our boards, committees, and commissions. So this is going to propose, as the staff memo highlights, take 17 and move it into 8 boards, committees, and commissions. And this sort of lists some of the notes that the city manager just pointed out, but I'll stress the STAR metrics. We collect a lot of data that we then filter through to report to STAR to say, how do we measure up to other communities? How do we measure up to this nationally recognized system of sustainability, of livability? What happens to those metrics? Some of them live in openevanston.org. Some of them live in different files throughout the city, but how do we make sure that that information is out to the broader community and is accessible and discussed and reported and given the proper Evanston review and scrubbing that we know we're all very proud of. So just a couple of other notes. I think something I discovered, and maybe if you looked through the minutes of different committee packets, that everyone wants to hear a lot of the same things. They want to hear about priority-based budgeting. They want to hear about the CIP. They want to hear about a different project, a specific project, and different people in the organization give different versions of a presentation, all correct and informative, but this is a way to help streamline some of that as well. Right, of those 17 boards and committees and commissions, there's 100 participants, and balancing that against 32,000 Evanston households, where are we reaching all the parts of Evanston, and is our boards, if we look at it from our boards, committees, and commissions, a way to inform people, or are they informing us? So thinking about that number and that ratio. Consistent approach, as I just mentioned, how do we move through this efficiently and take that vibrant livability metric that we're trying to reach. And then I'll just mention, as a community development director, I have staff that spend quite a bit of time preparing, going to meetings, following up on things for meetings, and particularly for community development, when we're trying to get through the busy season of construction, we have zoning staff that's tied up in meetings doing the work of the city, but some of those simple reviews build up the time builds up as the volume grows in the summer. So staff time and meeting preparations are pretty significant. And we also engage pretty extensively in a lot of other ways, through ward meetings, through community meetings, newsletters, and social media. So I'll just go through I think everyone's read the memo, but purple is created from blue and red, so that's kind of the format here. Back to my toddler time, we're learning colors right now. So the Built Environment Commission takes into into account public spaces, air quality, light and noise pollution, comprehensive planning. So taking the things that address built environment, Transportation Parking Committee, Housing and Homelessness Commission, the Parks portion of the Parks and Recreation Board, and the Lighthouse Landing Complex into a built environment commission that would deal with the policy and some of the regulatory issues related to all of these things. The things in red we often don't report or manage through a public body, so this would be some additional work. The Health and Safety Commission takes the 911 emergency telephone system, the Animal Welfare Board, and the Mental Health Board, and builds upon particularly the work of the Mental Health Board and bringing some of the public health programs that we provide in our work, access to healthy food, which is some of the work that we do in Health and Human Services, violence prevention, and resiliency. Resiliency is a theme throughout STAR, but in particular, there's stress about that in the Health and Safety Commission. Arts and Recreation Board. This pulls the Arts Council, the Commission on Aging, the recreation portion of the Parks and Rec Board, and then the 3 items for the STAR goal areas are support social and cultural diversity, promote a cohesive and connected community, and cradle to career. And when I gave this presentation to some of my colleagues a couple weeks ago, I used this as the flip of we address the things that we do in the built environment to build a strong and vibrant public space and community space, but then how we program it and how we utilize it to bring together the specialness and the cohesiveness that is Evanston is what would happen in a group like this. Economy and Jobs, the Economic Development Committee and the MWEBE Committee come together and take on a greater emphasis on workforce and green jobs and businesses in the Economic Vitality and Workforce Commission. These are all working names, by the way, if they're too long or we need to work on that. Climate and Energy Commission includes essentially the Utilities Commission and then some of the work of the Environment Board. The red are things that both groups seem to address, but improve energy and water efficiency, reduce material waste, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and green energy supply. Natural Systems Commission, again, brings in some of the Environment Board and Lighthouse Landing Complex Committee, as well as management of invasive species, protect and restore natural ecosystems, and working lands. So things like Edible Acre and the work that groups like that are doing. Equity and Empowerment Commission is our newest commission, would add in elements of Housing and Homelessness Commission, Age-Friendly Task Force, Human Service Programs, Community Engagement, and Poverty Prevention and Alleviation. And finally, the last one, the Zoning and Development Board brings together the Plan and the Plan Commission and the Zoning Board of Appeals. And then next steps, similar to what the city manager said.
So, Madam Chair, members of the committee, again, our purpose is just to kind of get some reaction, if any of this makes sense to you. I think from a staff perspective, many of these boards and commissions vary widely in the work that they do, very widely in the agenda and mandate that they have, and I think that one of the things we're most concerned about is making sure that individuals who volunteer for boards and commissions feel that they are substantively involved in good works to support the community. And we think that some of these changes, again, I think, Johanna, you said this was taking, was it 17 to 8?
17 to 8.
17 to 8. So there are still many boards and commissions that we are not proposing any changes to. So, 20 odd. So that's an important point as well. So this is not meant to take down everything we do to 8. It's merely a matter to go from a relatively large number now to perhaps a more meaningful number.
That leaves 26 boards.
Alderman Wilson?
As a general proposition, I think it makes some sense. I'm certain that the boards and commissions are going to want to weigh in. I've heard from a few of them already. So I would suggest that we present this material to them and ask them for some sort of report or feedback on a committee or commission by commission basis, so that we have something tangible that we can go through, as opposed to, I don't want to just leave it to anybody. Of course, can come at public comment, but I don't want to just leave it to that where we have 40 people showing up with only a couple of minutes. I'd rather have them sit down, go through it, and tell us what does or doesn't make sense. The only one that does give me some pause right off the right off the bat is the Plan Commission Zoning Board. Both of those can, number one, they can be labor intensive if development's going on. So to kind of force them to take on that level of additional time commitment is significant. And then the zoning board is also, it's a determining body in a lot of instances. So I don't want to put that group or that that board in potential conflict with what the Plan Commission might do in a project could, be in one venue and end up in another venue, and you might have you'd want separation. You wouldn't want the same people looking at it in two different contexts, if that makes sense. So that's my 10 cents. So maybe if we had them do that, put that together, and something, by the end of the year, and then we can regroup on that, after the first of the year.
Alderman Braithwaite?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I share this with Johanna. I recognize that this is a continuation of a process or a conversation we started maybe 2 years ago. I, too, wish that we would have had a heads up, whether a conversation with notification to committee chairs, especially for the ones that you selected. And so my question is, while you and the city manager are presenting this, did you have an opportunity to speak to any members of the staff? And I'm just curious to know if anyone from council was notified or weighed in on this presentation.
The second part, no, I don't.
Well, we actually, in the spirit of not giving boards, committees, and commissions peek at this before the council, the packet was posted, and then we, as staff for most of these boards, committees, and commissions, tried to reach the chairs to let them know after the packet was posted.
But there was no conversation with any members of the council, I don't think. We did present this to the management team a couple of weeks ago, more or less the presentation that you saw.
And we've had some side conversations as items over the past few months have come up as we've worked through this, but not this.
Sure. Again, it's the content of what you're presenting is a follow-up to a conversation we've had. I think it's the process that I'm weighing in on. So that's the first thing. So I hope that there are more conversations with committee chairs. Two comments. I think if you go back to the equity empowerment, that's the first one that I want to talk about. I actually had an opportunity for the first time to sit through one of their committee meetings, and I think we've, not only with our City of Evanston, but District 65 and citywide, we're putting a lot of emphasis on equity, and they talked, well, you sit on that committee as well, they talked about it, the framework for quite some time, and I think for a committee like that, because it's such a new initiative, I would want to see them stay independent before being absorbed with a whole host of other issues. So I don't know what our time frame, and I'm sure we'll come up with, some type of process for prioritizing these, but I just want to make note that, please feel free to speak up, you serve on that committee. I think that that's one that I would want to see develop their own sense of independence. And then my second point, as a follow-up to Alderman Wilson's comments, is, the MWEBE. Again, I think that that's a committee that we dig into a lot of details, and we have an amazing group of volunteers that are committed to that work. We have an amazing number of staff supporting it. I would not want to see that combined with economic development at any time in the future. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Alderman Nguyen?
Well, first, I'd like to thank Johanna for all of the thought and time that you put into this. I think that this is, I agree with some of the points you made, especially about equity and empowerment. We're just really crystallizing more of our thinking on that. But I do think that this is, we need to start thinking in this direction more, because it's too often we do see the effects of siloing, even though we're such a small community, that we do have the issue of something is worked on in one commission, and then it's also worked on in another commission, and they're not communicating with each other, and they need to be, or working together. I mean, the other issue that we have, as Ms. Burns was saying, is we have trouble finding people to serve. People are getting busier and busier, and it's harder and harder to find people to serve. So, I think this is
this is a direction we should move in. It doesn't necessarily mean we adopt the things that are presented here, but I think it should spark us to start thinking about ways that we should reorganize, because we do have an enormous amount of staff time that goes into this, and we have to be judicious in how we use our staff time. So that's one aspect. I do think efficiency is really important here, and the effects, the positive effects that we get from cross-marketing is the wrong word, but by combining these various interests. I was on the Environment Board. We always heard about the Utilities Commission. Way back when, we used to talk about how we actually should serve on the same board frequently because the issues overlapped so much. But I think that obviously some issues that we develop, we might want to have utilized task forces for a specialty issue. So you don't necessarily have someone who's committed to a 4-year term or a 3-year term, but who has a great deal of interest in a particular issue, can really help the city work on that to some extent. So I have comments to make, but I think this is a good start, and I think we're not going to solve it in a couple of meetings. We're going to move towards this, and I think hearing back from the committees themselves will be very helpful. They're the people who are on the ground, who are watching how their committees operate, and I'd like to hear what they have to say to this. One other point I wanted to make is, are there supplemental materials that we could also share that demonstrate how this type of organization or something similar to this streamlined organization work in other communities that could be comparable, so that we can understand better how it works elsewhere?
In my research, it doesn't look like other communities have taken the leap to combine. It's something that
Be blazing the trail.
we would be the leaders as we like to be, right? So we don't there. I look to the usual suspects of people we like to look to see if we're following, and they still have the separation. They also don't have as many boards, committees, and commissions as we do, but they don't have that.
Right.
There are communities, and again, we've just come up with let's look at the Plan Commission ZBA combination, so we can talk to many other communities have started to look at this, and as we talk to other planners and other communities, that's something that they're internally starting to discuss, because the limited staff resources and ability to do all the work with the resources is challenging. So we could certainly augment that with conversations with others.
Well, and also in those other places, they may not have made this, they may never have gotten to 43 and then had to streamline, but if they have fewer committees, I imagine they're covering similar levels of similar areas of topics, or maybe they just don't have a committee for every topic.
I think there's a little bit of that. I think there's also, we've embraced STAR very strongly from the beginning. So we were one of the first communities to certify. We are the first committee to certify under the updated certification of 2.0 for our 4-star rating. So I think we've really paved the way to be the leader on this. So I don't think anyone else has come up with this pattern, but there's always interest in what Evanston is doing, and we get asked that from other communities pretty regularly. What's going on with this aspect of STAR, and managing to livability is a hot topic right now.
Yeah. Well, Madam Chair, may I say one more item? I think in order to keep us moving, I don't know what the rest of the Rules Committee currently thinks, but I think in order to keep the discussion moving, we should perhaps set a return date to the Rules Committee to hear what the various boards and commissions have said about this, and to further our discussion with this.
Okay.
I don't have an idea of when that should be, but we should allow some time for this to percolate in the community.
Right. Okay. Alderman Fleming?
Thank you. I have a couple of concerns about the committees in terms of the ones that are looked to be put together. So I think I share the concern for the equity and empowerment, that they're trying to find their footing, and so to have them do something else might kind of set us back a little bit on our equity goal. The mental health board, since they currently are still funding agencies, I would be concerned about having the animal welfare board and the 911 system merge into that just because of that funding part. And I don't know if those new board members would be interested or, caught up to speed in terms of the funding and the monitoring of those agencies. And then I think my other bigger question is just, I definitely think 43 is maybe too many, particularly when I hear from citizens who either have been trying to get on one for a long time and, there's maybe not as much turnover on the committee they're looking for, or that we do have people who are serving maybe more terms we want because we don't have enough people. Or we hear, I know when I was on the housing board, they were concerned that they didn't necessarily have enough work to do. So I know that there is need to look at this and address that from this point. I guess my bigger question, though, is doing this under the STAR or doing this to kind of align further with STAR. I understand STAR and I know that that's something we use, but I guess at some point I would like us kind of just to discuss if we feel like we should be using STAR, if that's, if it aligns with our purpose as a city, as we look at our budget, as we think about staff time. I'm not exactly sure how much staff time goes into that, but looking at their website, they have a little bit over 70 communities. And I guess, want us to just think about more as a city. Should we be aligning? Should we be following STAR standards? Is that something that we are sewed into? Is that something we should revisit? So before we look at kind of reorganizing all this under the, framework of STAR, I would just want to make sure that we are all committed to STAR being something that we should still be striving for, or is that not something we need anymore? So that's just kind of another question for another day, but that does give me a little bit of a pause in restructuring under the STAR guise. I agree with Alderman Nguyen that we need to start these conversations and talk to our board members about realigning them. I think we might find that some people are maybe frustrated that they are not doing what they thought they'd be doing on these boards. But I guess I would want us to make sure we're aligning it in a way that would make sense for the city of Evanston versus aligning it in the way that kind of STAR suggests.
Alderman Ravel.
So first, thank you to staff for putting this together. It's very thought-provoking. Building on Alderman Fleming's comments, it does sound like maybe we need for us on the council, a review of the STAR Communities framework. I think when we looked at it initially, it was really a very thoughtful, comprehensive look at the many different elements that go into making a community truly livable. And I'm certainly hopeful that when we look at it again, that we'll want to say that this is something we want to continue to work towards. I was surprised in seeing, given how many boards, committees, and commissions we have, how many different elements of the STAR community framework, the goals or whatever, we're not actually addressing in our boards, committees, and commissions. And particularly when I've looked quite a bit at the Health and Safety Commission one, because I do have concerns, like Alderman Fleming mentioned, about the Mental Health Board's current role and how that would fit in with, this sort of proposed realignment. But when you look at the various areas that Health and Safety Commission would be addressing, none of those are currently on our board and commission list. Public health, access to healthy food, violence prevention, and resiliency. And yet I think those are all important things that we want the community to be addressing. And then I guess my other thought is that when you look at the areas of responsibility for these 6 or 7, however many we end up with, new boards and committees, some of those areas of responsibility are really huge, and I don't know whether that's going to be realistic or not either. So I think I'll be really interested to see what the various boards and commissions have to say, and I hope that they'll give us, not just saying, oh my gosh, this is awful, but I hope they'll give us some really thoughtful input about other ways that we might try to accomplish some of these goals. And I just look forward to further conversation.
Alderman Rainey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm wondering, Johanna, how long did it take our staff to put together this presentation for us?
I worked on this while I was on maternity leave, so that was hard to quantify. But I mean, it wasn't necessarily months. It was, this was a good hour here, hour there type of project. The memo that is in the packet, I started it last week.
But I mean, you worked with others too. I mean, there was.
No, this was mostly just me and Molly
Totally you?
and a few others.
So I find it very difficult, and I think I heard others implying this in their comments, that it's just too much to come up with a policy statement regarding all of this over 20 pages tonight. It's an hour-and-a-half meeting, and we have other business. So it's really just too much, regardless of how many few days we've had this to look at. I heard from, as some few people mentioned tonight, I heard from people on equity empowerment combination. Absolutely not. They've said it has to remain autonomous for a while. Also, the Plan Commission and Zoning Committee keep it separate. And I heard directly from the Mental Health Board saying that they find it absolutely, they're incredulous that they would be combined with the 911 committee and the animal shelter. That they really are. The woman that called me from the board was appalled, and I assured her that I would work hard with my fellow Alderman Ravel not to let that happen. And I'm sure they have lots of very cogent reasons for that, but it seems very common sense that they would not. And mainly, like Alderman Fleming said, they do funding, and they do have issues regarding food and nutrition. And
in terms
so,
of their
yeah,
grantees.
sure, yeah. And so does Community Development Block Grant. And I must say, there are people out there who want to serve on committees, but aren't being given a chance. So I hope we take a look at some of the applications we have and, put the proper people on the proper committees. So, anyway, I think it's important tonight that you're getting feedback about what the various boards and commissions are commenting on about this.
Mayor Haggerty is next.
Okay. Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and it's a pleasure to sit in your seat and get the view of the chamber and the councils from way over here on the right-hand side. First off, thank you, Johanna, for taking a crack at something that I think is important. We have a lot of boards and commissions. We have an engaged public, but I do think, based on looking at other cities and just the vast variety of boards and commissions that we have, that there's an opportunity here to streamline, to reduce the amount of staff time and support. We have lots of needs in this community, and every single one requires support. Just so I am supportive of this idea. I appreciate that you have a framework. I like a framework, and I think the STAR system that the city's adopted for a while is a good framework in which to look, but you could use another framework. So I just really care about a framework and a methodology. So I appreciate that. I'm not going to get into all the different iterations in what you did, other than to say I share the concern that others expressed up here just about ZBA and planning. I mean, to me, those are two, really big committees with large workload, and so I'm just not sure how those two get combined in a city like ours. I would be interested in the other, just so we could see a list the next time. I mean, I look at tonight as just the first discussion that we're having on this, and I would hope in 2019 we'd really get some additional information, hear from the members of the boards and the committees, and from the public, and see if there's opportunities to consolidate. But I would be interested in the next time around in the list of the other 26. Okay. And then the other thing that would be interesting, what I found as mayor with all these different boards is ordinances for each one. And the one that just struck me as an awfully long term was Parks and Rec. it's 5 year. It's a 5-year term, and you can be appointed 2 times. So that's 10 years. So if we ultimately do reduce the number of boards, there may be other ways to again rotate more people into the boards and in the commissions. And then the last thing I would say is, some of the most effective. Well, I think all the boards are effective, but let's just remember too, this council has not been shy when necessary to appoint a task force or an ad hoc board, which has a really defined mission and purpose. And I think lots of residents appreciate that too, because you can commit for, okay, I'll do this for a year and know that there's an end date. That's why I did Harley Clark, because I knew after being on that advisory board, we'd be all done with the issue. So, all right, that concludes my remarks. So thank you, Johanna.
Alderman Bruce Simmons.
Thank you. So this makes sense. I do continue to have concerns about who is representing the community on these boards and commissions. I've asked for a report on broken down by ward. I think that we can do more outreach to make sure that all communities are represented, especially on the committees, on certain committees. If you could, for the record, could you share the purpose of the committees and the duties and the responsibility of the committees so that residents understand exactly why it's important that they apply?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a couple comments. I pretty much agree with.
Could you do that now?
I'm sorry. Yes.
Could you do that now?
I'm sorry, the purpose of each board, committee, and commission?
Not each.
Of the existing ones, or?
Just generally, what is the role of an appointed resident on committees?
Let me take a quick stab at that.
Thank you.
The City of Evanston's boards and commissions kind of fall into different buckets. Some of them are set by statute outside of the city. So the land use boards, for example, are set outside the city code, plus also in the city code. So they have adjudication, approval roles that are set. And so that's one group of them. There is another group that have specific tasks that are annual. The Housing Community Development Act Committee, the Mental Health Board, groups that allocate dollars, have a set fixed purpose each year, and they have an annual work plan to do that. And then there is a third group of committees that really have been created over time to monitor and provide advice to the City Council on specific policy areas, and everywhere from the Animal Welfare Board to the MWEBE Committee to the Utilities Commission, all the various lines of business, the issues that we have. And so those boards do not have statutory authority to take independent action. They do not allocate dollars, but they provide advice and counsel to the City Council on various matters. So I think they all fall into those three categories. I think on sheer numbers, the majority of them fall into the third category. And I think that's one of the challenges, is that when a board does not have a specific work plan, does not have specific responsibilities, then I think that is a challenge for both the council, the City Council, as well as the boards and commissions. But those are the three categories.
Thank you.
Okay. So if I can just take a moment here, I generally agree with everyone that this needs much more vetting, and going to the sources is a very good idea. I think the idea of a task force is one I would be interested in as well. I do want to know a little bit more about, from the city manager, about staff's, the time that staff spends with the boards and commissions, how staff is reimbursed for their time, whether it's they receive time off for the evenings that they spend. Generally, how is that impacted on the other work that we ask them to do? So I was struck by something that Johanna said about how various boards and commissions can have ask similar questions and get maybe slightly different answers depending on who is staffing them. There must be a way to streamline that and still provide the kind of service to the committees that we have been doing. So, Mr. City Manager, as part of our continuing conversation, I guess I would like a little bit more about staff at staff time.
And certainly, and Johanna, you can help me keep track of that. And I think the answer is really all over the place. There are many exempt staff members that staff boards and commissions, so there is no overtime, there is no flex time. It is something that they take on above and beyond their responsibilities. We have administrative staff that take minutes and notes. Often that is done on overtime. There are times associated with minutes. We've also tried very hard, and the Rules Committee has discussed this over the years, of action minutes versus verbatim minutes, and the committee's been very supportive to make those changes over the years. So we have seen some reduction. But we can, I think, do just quickly looking at the list, and it really is all over the place. And I think we want to be mindful so that there is opportunity for connectivity. I mean, right now, Kimberly Richardson, the Deputy City Manager, part of her responsibility is to try to provide that connectivity between the boards and commissions. And, on a topic-by-topic basis, we're able to do that sometimes, but mostly not. I mean, really, she has been supporting Ms. Francelno and the mayor just on the churn that is filling the vacancies of the various boards and commissions. So Madam Chair, members of the committee, I think what I'm hearing you say is that you would like us to continue to at least examine these issues with the Rules Committee meeting every other month. I think the month of February would make sense for us to come back with some initial thoughts. I think we go back to the boards and commissions themselves. We purposely started here since you are the appointing bodies. But I also heard that perhaps the ZBA plan, equity and empowerment are perhaps on the lower end of this. So I think we'll reach out to everyone, but I just want to communicate back to you that message has been clearly heard, and we will not spend a lot of time requiring those groups to justify why they believe they should be the way they are. But I think certainly as we talk with other groups, if there is some good feedback, and it may be, again, if the health and safety slide remains up on the screen, I think there are areas that we don't cover, and I think perhaps maybe an additional response would be just an assessment, regardless if we're looking at STAR or not. Are there areas of community concern that none of our boards and commissions cover? And so maybe, Johanna, we can also add that to part of the response back in February to what pieces do we think we're not covering? And certainly, health and safety and sort of the 30,000-foot level is one that we could probably do a better job.
Alderman Rainey?
I would hope the city manager would add mental health to that list, to your exclusive list, to the zoning plan commission.
And I think that the money allocating. I will say though that as your city manager, I am concerned that we don't do more with health. You're going to see the budget on Friday. We are going to be recommending some changes in the Health and Human Services Department. But from a policy perspective, especially if we're going to be having reduced resources in that area, knowing what's important to the larger community in the area is important. So if not through something like this with the Mental Health Board, then perhaps there's another mechanism to do that.
Okay, well, we'll move on. The next agenda item is the alderman vacancy on the Animal Welfare Board.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, there are, I believe, two, Alderman Nguyen, is it two members that are on the Animal Welfare Board? So it's now been Alderman Braithwaite. And so my understanding is that there is an aldermanic vacancy.
Mm-hmm. Can we change that?
I thought we just reduced it to one when we did the consolidation.
And it may be that is something that has not been acted upon because
hasn't been updated.
Because if that is the will of the committee, then maybe it's as simple as a motion to move forward.
Well, yeah, why don't we do that? Because I talked to Kimberly Richardson earlier. As Wally said, she is really quarterbacking all of these 43 commissions, and she said there had been a vacancy. So the question for us was, does someone else want to serve on it? Or she asked if we would pass a motion to make it just one alderman position, and then that would reduce the number for quorum.
Okay. Then I'll,
I can make
Okay.
a motion then to.
well, Alderman Rainey first.
I make a motion that we require one alderman.
Second.
Anyone want to speak to this? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Oh, Alderman Rainey, I'm sorry. Did you
No,
want to speak?
I'm in favor of it.
Okay.
But I want to ask a question
Okay, do you want to ask a question?
on another, on animal shelter, but on another subject.
Okay, all right. Then all of those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All righty. Alderman Rainey?
It just occurred to me, is there some place where we can find their minutes? Are there meetings?
Oh, yeah, Michelle publishes those.
Okay.
But they're not, you're saying they're not online?
I don't know.
They are.
This just occurred to me, I should be looking for minutes or something. We should.
It is a group that
on
meet-
their website?
We only
They
meet
have a
quarterly.
website, huh?
And I happen to have it up. I will forward their website to the full council. They meet in January, April, July, and October, and so they have a meeting coming up. Their last meeting was on July the 11th.
Oh, I missed July. Okay.
So I will
I'll check
forward
it
this
out.
to the full council. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Rainey. The next item on the agenda is the discussion on dissolving the Taxi Cab Advisory Board.
So moved.
Second?
All right. Mayor Haggerty?
All right, so some of the aldermen that have been on here for a while will have more background, but I asked Kimberly Richardson before I came in here tonight to just give me some background on the Taxi Cab Advisory Board, and she said the last time that this board has met was in 2015. So while it sits here as a committee, it's not meeting. And her point was, if there's an issue that comes up, her recommendation would be we just handle it in Transportation Committee. So that's just sort of the background.
So, do you want to?
Okay, anybody else? Then all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All righty. The next item is the update of financial disclosure statement and review amendment of requirement for notarization of financial disclosure statements. Mr. City Manager?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, this is an item that had been previously referred to the committee. Michelle Mason, the Corporation Counsel, has a memorandum here in the packet explaining the various responsibilities. We're here to see if the council wishes to make any changes to this policy. The city clerk's also here and may wish to make comment.
Okay, first let me call on Alderman Wilson.
Let's let the clerks go.
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead,
No,
please.
Okay. Well, I guess a couple things. We'd had conversations about the form previously. What I guess I'd prefer to see is maybe a red line version of what it's going to look like, so we can see how it's marked up. There were a few reservations I had about the way it was drafted previously. For example, it said things like, information about your significant other. Yeah, exactly. So there are a couple of, at best antiquated terms, but if we could just get some of that language stuff cleaned up, that would be, I think, useful. And if we did that in a red line format so we could see what it would look like, that would be helpful.
Yeah, and also to, from my standpoint, the reason I think this discussion is happening is because we wanted to make sure that the forms could be accepted electronically, which would bring into into make it comport with what other offices are doing statewide. There are also a few other amendments that were not included, and I'm going to pass this to the council.
So, Alderman Wilson, to your...
My wish has come true.
I was just getting ready to say, then we can review this document and...
Well, no, so this is not a...
If I think
Go ahead,
so.
yes, I
So to
apologize.
Alderman Wilson's point, it was a wanting to be able, for us all to be able to look at the document as a working document, and then we can give our edits back to the clerk, and then you would come back with a combined...
Yeah, but to clarify, Alderman Wilson was referring directly to the financial disclosure form and the questions on the form. This is a few changes that were not included that I have discussed previously. Changes to the code. One change to the code is it's highlighted here under Section C. in the code as it stands now, it says that the financial disclosure forms of all aldermen are not to be disclosed until the alderman is notified that who has requested their financial disclosure forms. And also it says that financial disclosure forms of all members of boards, commissions, and committees shall be maintained in confidence. And I believe that flies in the face of of the FOIA law. And so we can't hold these documents in confidence. And so I think those changes should be made to the code as well. So that's what C, D, and E are.
Alderman Wilson, and then Alderman Braithwaite.
Okay, so along with the red line version of the actual form, I'd like our council for the next meeting, and I think this will have to come back in the next meeting,
Yeah, right.
To kind of weigh in on this. But I do have some significant reservations about, there's got to be a balance. So, somebody who signs up to be on, the 911 committee, you don't want the stalker coming and getting a lot of detailed personal information about them. And that's, it's a legitimate concern. So, mine's got to be out there, but I've had my share of really, really extraordinarily odd things from people who, go find my, address and things like that.
So address, if someone were to FOIA this document, addresses would be redacted.
Well, I mean, none of that's in here. So, I mean, we'll have to work this up so that it's...
it's under the FOIA law, so it's addressed in statutes elsewhere.
Okay.
But I do agree that we should ensure that folks who there's a balance between ensuring that folks who are deciding to participate on boards and committees feel comfortable doing that, but there's also the public interest to ensure that folks who are participating on those boards and committees don't have a conflict of interest in their service.
One thing's like for example, the fact that I own a house. Right. That presents the potential conflict. So if I'm seeking zoning relief for the house, or if I own another property, so that has to get disclosed because I'm a decision maker. But and that is not exempt from FOIA. But I think the same thing is likely to apply to a board or commission member. So it just has to be carefully done so that we're not putting somebody in an inappropriately compromising position.
Alderman Braithwaite, and then Alderman Fleming.
Thank you, Madam. And I share these comments directly with the clerk. I just remind you that we are a council, and so I appreciate you putting forth your recommendations. And I think, just repeating what Alderman Wilson, we now have an opportunity to digest it, and I hope you have as much respect for our opinion and thought as we do for yours that you put in here.
I hope.
Fair enough. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Alderman Fleming.
Yeah, my only thing I wanted to point out as you guys are going over this with the clerk and legal, number 6 talks about the conflict of interest, and since we're going to speak about that tonight, I guess I just want to make sure whatever is decided kind of falls under conflict of interest is somewhere is specified a little more, because if we do have people on boards and commissions and they write down something and, we're human and they forget something, and these forms are public, just as I think down the road, if we decide as a council or as this rules committee kind of what falls under conflict of interest, that is also clear on here. So I don't know how many words we want to put on this form, or if you want to reference kind of a definition, because I don't want people to, think, well, I went to high school with someone, so that's a conflict, or, I just want to be very clear on what the conflicts are, particularly as we talk about money. If you rent, if you were to rent a home from me, does that mean you have a conflict? I don't want people to be precluded from serving because they are not sure what a conflict really is, and then have, the public come back and criticize them.
If I can clarify, so answers to this document wouldn't preclude anyone from serving on any board or commission. It would simply allow the public to know what potential conflicts are. So in a specific instance, if an issue arises, they can recuse themselves in that issue, or if it's so core to the duties of the board, they can choose to not serve on that board. Or
right, the mayor would not
council can
reject them, but I don't want someone to get this and just say, I'm not going to even bother applying because I have a, I think we need to be clear.
And
So
actually,
as we're talking tonight about what conflict is, I just think if we're going to use the term in this form, then it should be clear as to what that is.
What a conflict is, yes. And I just want to note that this form is filled out after a person is confirmed to a committee. This is after they've been confirmed.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Mr. City Clerk.
Yes.
Is this form shared with people when they apply for a board or commission? Do they know they're going to have to fill
Yes,
this out?
it is. My understanding of the practice is that the staff liaison for whatever the appropriate board or committee lets the new member know that, hey, you have to fill this out. And then all members of boards and committees and commissions submit this annually along with you all, the council.
So that's what a staff member, one of our staff members does who serves on or represents that board or commission?
That's typically how it's done. I mean, if you have
Okay.
yeah, Dara, I think, sent out a letter. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, actually, the mayor is coming from the mayor.
Oh, well.
The letter is sent that includes that.
Okay. My other question is, have you discussed this, your changes with the law department?
Months ago, when this discussion was first raised.
So the law department has vetted this and is...
I have given this to either Michelle or Mario months ago. I think it was Michelle. Along with the mayor. If Mayor Hagerty, if you remember the discussions a while ago when this was first brought up, I gave a copy of this to the exact same thing to Mayor Hagerty as well as the law department.
Hi, this is Chair Fisk, honorable members of the Rules Committee, Mario Trotto, Deputy City Attorney. We have received this. We have tried to set up a meeting with the clerk, so we haven't been able to fully vet it and discuss all these matters with the city clerk.
Okay. I would suggest that happen before. Is there anyone else who wanted to speak to this?
Nope.
Okay, then let's move on then.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, Madam Chair, members of the committee, we'll come back then at your December meeting with at least an update of where we're at.
Okay. Next item is the electronic sign-in sheet for public comment at city council meetings.
Again, Madam Chair, members of the committee, this was an item that was raised at a city council meeting. I believe this was on your last Rules Committee agenda. We did not get to it. The city clerk is here, can, I think, speak to it.
It's pretty straightforward. It's as opposed to a piece of paper, we're looking to use technology. What it does is it streamline the process. The mayor can receive the public comment sheet directly on his phone and immediately know how many folks have signed up. For my office, it makes recording the minutes a bit easier because folks, instead of writing their name, and also for the mayor, it makes it a bit easier to call folks' names as opposed to having to read hard to read handwriting. It's clearly typed. It also, one of the goals that I have is to include a few optional questions. You can't require folks to disclose things to sign up for public comment, but currently on the paper sheet we have a column for ward. We'd like to be able to collect some data as to, what are the demographics of the folks that are coming out, and it would all be voluntary, but again, this would streamline the process, allow the public comment sheet to go directly to the mayor's phone, immediately know how many people have signed up, and be able to very clearly and legibly read the names.
Like what demographics are you talking about?
To be able to understand, ward demographics, ethnic demographics, that kind of stuff of who's coming to speak before the council.
So you're going to have columns that ask for people's ethnicity and...
Voluntarily, it would be an optional thing. The only thing you'd be required to submit is your name and the agenda item that you're looking to speak to, and if you so choose, you can also submit what ward you live in or your ethnicity, so we can have, again, data on public comment and see how that, be able to track trends and understand how folks are coming out and what brings people out.
I have a problem with tracking trends. Alderman Wilson?
Okay, yeah, so you just lost me with tracking trends. I have a lot of reservations about data collection, and I'd share with you before. I'm still really, really worried or bothered by the fact that the clerk's office uploaded voter records, voter data, voter telephone numbers.
We didn't do that
to the third-party vendor. You did.
We were.
I mean, what was it called? I forget what it's called.
That's a miscarriage. We purchased that information from a vendor. We didn't upload any information at any point to any vendor or website during our election turnout efforts.
So what company did you use to compile the phone list?
We used L2 as one company. Call Hub was a company that we used as well.
Nation
as
Builder. Nation Builder. Okay.
Yeah.
But the data got uploaded to Nation Builder, all the data that was compiled that you
It
got
wasn't from the clerk's office. That information comes from the State Board of Elections.
Okay. The point is that
Public information.
someone who is operating on behalf of the city compiled a lot of data about our voters and put it in a format that's easily accessible by somebody else, not us.
I mean, anybody here could walk out and submit and request the voter file. It's public information. It's not something.
I feel strongly about this. It's not the government's job to do that. It's if somebody wants to do that, they can, but the government shouldn't be doing that. The government shouldn't be tracking people's political activities. So let's say somebody comes and says they do a FOIA. I would like to know every time that Don Wilson came and spoke at a city council meeting, and the date and subject matter and whatever else, and you've got these data fields. So someone is going to have access to that. Or I'd like to know every single person who came and spoke in favor of Harley Clark. And so now they're going to be, targeted by somebody who has a differing view. So
if I can chime into that point, that list already exists. It's the public comment sheet. The only difference is one would be on paper and one would be an electronic database. So if someone could come in, and it's happened before, I think Ms. Gavin, who is here, has FOIA'd a public comment sign-in sheet, and we have to turn it over to her. Or someone, the media, people have FOIA'd public comment sheets before.
But it's a little bit different.
Okay. Okay.
Order, just call.
We're not taking any comment from the audience right now. This is a conversation that's taking place up here.
I'm concerned about the compilation of data on our citizens and our residents. And we might not be using it for a subversive purpose. You might not be using it for a subversive purpose. You're probably not going to be the clerk forever. So 5 or 10 years down the road, we don't know what someone's going to do with that data or information. Mm-hmm. So, it's one thing to have information. It's another thing to compile it and put it into formats and to track trends and things of that nature. I don't think that's the government's job. Right. That's a philosophical opinion. People might all disagree with me, but I feel pretty strongly that I don't think the government should be tracking our residents and putting them into categories on how they behave politically.
So, wait, I think this is kind of going off the rails. We're not, this is simply a public comment sign-in sheet. One exists now. The difference between what exists now and what I am proposing is one would be on paper and one would be electronic. Currently, if you look at the public comments sheet as it exists today, we already ask, again, it's voluntary, for someone's ward. I think it's very beneficial for us to understand, what ward someone is, when talking to an issue. I think it's important for you to understand maybe what ward folks are coming from. If a bunch of folks from the 4th Ward show up, it might make you perk your ears up a bit more on an issue. And so,
but we're here anyway.
Okay, Alderman Fleming, Mayor Hagerty, and then Alderman Nguyen, please.
All right, so very quickly, I don't mind the electronic sheet. I think it probably, in my opinion, is helpful because people can't always get here, early when the sheet's here. We often start much later than the online, calendar has us. And so if someone can go online, they know they're on their way. I think we have to be very mindful about a turn-off time for that online sign-up so
right.
that,
that's completely at the chair's discretion.
So I don't mind. I think on online, it's 2018. I think we need to kind of move along and understand that some people might want to just sign in on their phone and not get here and be bothered with the paper, and the paper is not always there.
I just want to be clear. I didn't have a problem with that part of it. It's
right, so get into the next part. So I don't necessarily see it as tracking. I probably feel like everything I've ever said is somewhere anyway. If we already put, I'm surprised people come up here and tell me where they live at. I didn't realize that was at one point a requirement, but people still come and give their entire...
No, it's actually, it's illegal for us to do it.
Yeah.
To require.
Okay, anyway, I'm surprised people come up and do it, because that's not what I would think to do. But so I'm assuming some people who give public comment don't mind writing their address or their ward or their race.
And to be clear, we're not, go ahead.
Can you let me finish, please? I don't know how the FOIA sheets are used now in terms of, how the sign-in sheets are used now in terms of FOIA. I guess I don't want to see spreadsheets, and I'm assuming you would not do this, people's names and who came to speak about what thing and what other thing. I guess am concerned about those kind of hot button topics that, that people would come in and FOIA whoever spoke on Harley Clark or whatever the topic is, and then somehow or another those people, either that would preclude people from speaking because they don't want to be on the anti-Harley Clark list, or that those people would be, harassed at some other point because they did sign up to speak. So I imagine that could happen if you're that interested with the paper copy now, but that would be my concern in terms of electronic, that we would have to be very clear on who could access that, only because it seems to be that our community is getting very divided over certain issues, and I would hate for someone to come and give their opinion and then feel like they're going to be attacked because now it's, under FOIA law, which I never would have thought that even the sign-in sheets were even under FOIA law as it is. So, but that's probably a bigger issue in terms of the culture and of where we are right now in society.
If I may address that. Currently, if you look at the minutes, and one, we keep a video of what's done here, so anyone at any point on their own could compile a list of, you come here, you announce your name, and you give your public comment, so it's already in the public sphere. It's also recorded in the minutes, so that list could be compiled by anyone just by going and looking at the minutes. So really what this would do is streamline the process for public comment sign-in, to make it easier for the mayor to read names, to make it easier for my office to correctly record the spelling of folks' names in the minutes.
But you would also still have the paper copy, correct?
We would still, my plan would be that we would be, myself or someone from my office would be stationed there and help folks sign in electronically if help is needed.
Yeah, help is definitely going to be needed. We need to move this along. Mayor Haggerty, then Alderman Nguyen, Alderman Braithwaite, and then Alderman Suffredin.
I'll pass to move it along.
Okay. Alderman Nguyen?
Well, I guess my question was, it was one thing to point out that for years, we did require people unknowingly to give, unknowingly that it was not legal to give their address. And then we stopped. So, because, actually for very good reasons, I thought. And because as soon as you hear someone's address, you make a judgment, or some people might. So, I thought it was actually interesting to how different citizen comment was when we didn't have someone give their address. So that's one thing. But we're going to have tons of people who come in who just think they're going to sign up. So we're going to have a person stationed there to have them sign in electronically, because there are going to be loads of folks who are going to need instruction on how to sign in.
Yeah, we're prepared to bring people up to speed. I'm always here, sitting in the Aldermanic Library for the hours before a council meeting. It wouldn't be an inconvenience to sit out in the hallway, or someone from my office.
Well, and I also share the concerns about data gathering. There's already in the world, there's too much of our data that's being gathered for purposes that we don't know. I'm a suspicious person about that type of thing. I would like the government not to gather data on me.
If I may clarify, it's all voluntary. It's just an option. The two questions that I want to ask are about your ward and your ethnicity. It's an optional. The only thing you're required is to give your name and your agenda item, and then the rest, it would be, the other two questions would be optional. If it is of a great import to the committee, I'm fine dropping the ethnicity and moving forward.
Alderman Braithwaite and then Suffredin.
Yeah, I'll be brief. And again, to the clerk, I appreciate and enjoy the energy and innovation that you're bringing to the office. I remind you that we're a council, and there are a lot of experiences that are behind this dais. And when you come with these wonderful ideas, I just ask that you give the courtesy to the members of the council and just listen to feedback. That's it. I think the electronic is a nice innovation. I like the fact that people can submit their comments ahead of time. I think that's valuable. But I think with other situations, even if we vote to pilot this, my concern is when you have the hot topics and people would flood whatever the internet channel is and not show up and somehow displace the folks that are here. So love the fact of submitting comments, not big fan of folks being able to crowd their names in ahead of time and then not show up, particularly when we have those hot topics. So that's my feedback for you.
Alderman Seffernan?
Just real quick, we had kind of talked about this when we were both first elected, kind of having the sign-in like you have at funeral homes, where it's type in your own name, it auto-populate if you're a frequent person. Would it move it in the direction you're trying to go if we basically had an electronic version of the existing sign-in sheet and then allowed people to opt in to receive an email from you asking those questions later so that they're not answering them at the time they sign in for public comment? And they can consider whether or not they would like to give you that information. I don't know if that solves your problem, Alderman Wilson.
Now you're, in addition to the information that you just got, the person who FOIAs it can get your email.
No, again, email addresses can't be FOIA'd.
I'm just uncomfortable with the data management. And also, you're going to use an app, right?
Google Forms.
Okay. All right. Originally, it was an app with the QR reader or something.
Google Forms. The QR just led to a Google form.
Okay.
Okay, I guess what I was trying to get at, I mean, having
I'm
names
actually
spelled
fine,
correctly and putting them in themselves would probably be a more efficient.
The data gathering part is something that I'm interested in. I think any Fortune 500 company collects metrics on their constituents. I think it's important for us to understand who's coming out. I'm fine dropping the ethnicity of folks if that is of great concern, although it's I think quite apparent to folks if you just look at the video what someone's ethnicity is.
We need to move along. I'm sorry, folks.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, does anyone want to make a motion here? Anybody?
A motion for a pilot program.
I think we need to.
I think Alderman Wilson recommended we move this to legal department for review and comment, didn't he?
No, that was the other
That was for
stuff.
the financial disclosure document.
I guess it's two parts. So first, we should all provide feedback and give us a week, and then submit it. Yes, so I'm
Move on to
starting
a
with this
different
because this
topic.
is what Alderman Wilson. So this is the financial disclosure affiliation statement.
We already did
covered
that.
that.
Yeah, so
We already
but-
did that.
So
We're on to the next agenda. item.
So we're on the
got it,
electronic sign-in sheet.
Okay.
right.
So I would make a motion. So I move that we pilot an electronic sign-in sheet program for city council.
Through the end of the year.
But it's more than that, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, I guess we would need to decide. I don't have strong feelings about collecting the data, so I'm happy to move it as proposed with the data, but that's because I don't.
I can't support the data collection. Personally,
That's why
I think it's
suggested
creepy.
we move it.
What if we just did the option award as we have right now? It's already on the
That
paper.
would be fine with me.
All right, so I move that we
Name
pilot an
award.
electronic sign-in for public comment at city council meetings with the optional award designation.
Name and ward.
Name and ward and topic. You have to do your
But
topic.
I think there also needs to be a paper sign-in sheet as well. The last time I observed it, it wasn't working at all. So I just want to
Okay,
make
well,
sure
I'm
that
just
everybody-
piloting the electronic one. We can keep, I'm sure the clerk will be open to keeping a paper one as we do.
Well, I think we need to give that direction because I want everyone who wants to speak at a city council meeting to be able to do that. And I'm concerned about.
So would you
the
like to amend
confusion.
my motion to include the
Yeah,
paper?
that would be great.
So again, okay, I make a motion that we pilot an electronic sign-in sheet for public comment at city council to include an optional ward column, in addition to keeping with our same practice of a paper sign-in.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
No.
All right, that'll carry. It's a pilot program.
Did we give a date?
How
I'm sorry.
long is the pilot program for?
Till the end of the year.
Okay.
Okay, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more items to go through, so we're going to have to do this fairly quickly. The next item is an update on the consent calendar, pilot at Administrative and Public Works and Planning and Development. Mr. City Manager?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, from a staff perspective, it's going well. I think the question for the committee is this something you'd like to do permanently?
Yes.
Yes.
I didn't notice a difference.
Yeah.
Okay, is there a motion?
Move to continue moving forward with this program permanently.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Next item is amend City Council rules to set a time to end council meetings. Mr. City Manager?
Yes, you have a staff report that was updated for date only, so the information's still back from August. It's been my experience that after 11 o'clock or so, decision-making becomes difficult for any city council. And so I would, we put together some information for what other communities do around the country. My sense is that perhaps if there was a rule that at 11 o'clock, if the council was still meeting, that the council would pause, review the agenda, and make decisions as to how much further after 11 o'clock the council wanted to continue. So if that is something that the committee is interested in discussing, then we could come back with an appropriate change to the council rules.
Alderman Wilson and then Rainey. I don't know what order you were in, so I'm sorry about that.
Thank you. As appealing as the idea is, I have some reservations about it. The work will still need to get done, and I think the likely result would be is that we would have to come back for yet another meeting. If anybody happened to be interested in that, they would have to also show up at another meeting. And I think just with the idea that you are, have this option to roll it over, it's going to be too easy to roll it over. So I just think things will pile up and will not get stuff done. It's not the ideal incentive, but if people want to go home, you got to put your head down and you got to get the work done. So that's my philosophy on it.
Alderman Rainey, then Wynn.
I reviewed meetings on a random basis without any knowledge of what time they ended, and I noted that numerous meetings began, and I mean began, meaning not when citizen comment began, but when the first item on our agenda began, well after 9:30 at night. If that is the case, then ending a meeting at 11 o'clock means we're not able to do the city's business. And so I would recommend that we have another survey as to when our first item on the agenda began, and then take a look at requiring our meetings to begin at a certain time, as opposed to when our meetings should end. Because our meetings need to begin, I would say, no later than 8 or 8:30. 8:30, I would say, it's absolutely the latest.
Alderman Wynn?
There have been meetings that we did not start until 10:30.
Right, yeah. In many other communities, legislative bodies have time suggestions for topics. And you can see this in a lot of other places where a certain amount of time is allotted for a topic. And I don't know whether that's something that we should look at, but I agree, Alderman Rainey, we should look at when we start. I was guessing that a lot of meetings we started at 9:30. But I think perhaps to help discipline ourselves, maybe we could look at the idea that there is a certain amount of time given actually the significance of the topic, and that's what a lot of other legislative bodies do in order to manage their schedules.
Alderman Rainey?
Our problem does not have to do with members of the council dragging out certain topics or taking too long on individual topics. Our problem has to do with beginning the meeting. So and as a matter of fact, we don't give enough time to a lot of the most important topics. It's not that we spend too much time on them or that we need to be limited in time to our topics. We just don't get to those topics in time.
I'm sorry, but, and we could go back to, another solution is we could go back to having simultaneous ANPW and planning and development.
I think that's a wonderful idea.
Right, but it does mean that you don't get the ability to observe.
I know.
The other committee.
That's the problem with the number of aldermen that we have.
Right. Okay, I'm Alderman Fleming.
This is I guess, a big one, but now that we do the consent calendar in AP&W, we have a lot of things, or when I was chair, that we didn't discuss. We voted on the consent calendar, even things that were like our last meeting had a lot of liquor license things that weren't consent calendar but went pretty fast. So maybe I would suggest, or if we are interested, maybe next year after the budget, looking at just merging APW with council, because I find when I was chair, maybe I just went too fast, but there weren't a lot of things we were pulling off to have a big discussion on. There were things we pulled off and maybe had a small discussion, but those are also things we could, ask our couple questions to staff beforehand. We could ask them at council, but then that way we can maybe merge one committee that is a little bit more standard. You guys can still have P&D before city council, and then, given the topic and how long the public comment is, we can just have AP&W bills and all that stuff discussed by the council.
It's not a bad idea.
Okay.
I said it's not a bad idea, but it might actually be a good idea. So.
I mean, there are a lot of things that I'm speaking again from my experience, that once we went consent calendar, we just didn't even discuss. And I find that myself, and I'm sure my peers, just asked their questions of staff beforehand and were satisfied with the answers and didn't need to, take up more council time or more committee time to do that.
Alderman Wilson.
And it seems to me that typically the things that the committee will end up discussing a lot end up getting discussed at council again. So, for the P&D group, it's new to us, but you just sat through, hour and a half or 2 hours of whatever you were doing. So, all right, my first reaction is that I like that idea.
Okay, and I'm going to throw out something else. I'd like the idea of going back to simultaneous ANPW and P&D. But I'm also going to suggest, why don't we think about just moving everything forward so that we start city council meetings at 6 o'clock. That would mean ANPW at 4, P&D at 6, or
That's
that
not
doesn't
hard
work.
for
Okay,
folks. You have
all right,
to
forget it.
Come from outside of Evanston.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, perhaps what we could do is come back at your December meeting with some options for the council to consider with the spirit of the discussion this evening, and you can have to talk some more.
Okay, all right. We're going to move on then to number 10, the Alderman Committee Chair rotation. Mr. City Manager.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Alderman Sufferton asked that this item be placed on the agenda this evening. I think we included the list. Normally what occurs is the rotation schedule for chairmanships are approved by the council at the beginning of the term. So on page 30 of your packet is the listing of those, the 4 standing committees. Actually, there's some additional pages that deal with other committees where council members serve transportation and parking, economic development. I apologize that page did not get included in your packet. So the question was, is a once every 4-year review appropriate, or is it more frequent review? Alderman Sufferton, I don't know, should we add anything?
Some rotate, some don't. If rotation's the best practice, they should all rotate. If not rotating is best practice, none of them should rotate. I think we should have a discussion about it.
Mayor Haggerty.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I concur with Alderman Sufferton. Just sort of like what I talked about earlier, where we've got these boards and commissions. Some of them have 5-year terms for 2 5-year terms. I'd like to see some more consistency. So if we rotate chairs as we do on lots of these other committees, I'd just like to see us make sure we do that on all the ones that have, multiple aldermen on them.
Alderman Fleming.
So in the spirit of having good ideas, this was actually mine, not Alderman Sufferton's. So I realize that I sit on a committee that doesn't rotate chairs, and while I'm not necessarily looking for more things to do, I do think it's important that we rotate chairs, just we have more opinions and so on and so forth. So I would like all the committees that have aldermen to rotate chairs, if they have obviously more than one alderman, so that they can rotate. And I also think it also, as aldermen, allows us or pushes us to take more responsibility for the different committees that we do sit on.
Alderman Braithwaite?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I serve on one of those committees whose chair has not rotated since I've served on council, and I don't, for any alderman that serves on it, typically has to serve on economic development, and I don't have an issue with rotating for MWEBE.
Alderman Nguyen?
Well, I have served on parking and transportation and parking the whole time I've been on the council, and I've been chair, for a very long time, partly because no one else wanted to be chair, so I am fine with it rotating.
That's two.
Okay, Alderman Rainey, wait, we just...
I continued as chair on Community Development Block Grant Committee because the chairs before me were non-rotating chairs, and that was the way it was. And the reason I, have no problem being a chair is because I think I'm the only alderman who's never missed a committee meeting. But I would be glad to give it up to another alderman if they want to do it.
Alderman Braithwaite?
So to keep us moving forward, then, Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion that, what item is this? Item 10, that I move that that the committee, the three committees that don't rotate, that staff come back and get them in line with our other rotating committees and make a recommendation at our next meeting that we can vote on.
Second. And what are those committees, the three committees? please?
MWEBE, Transportation, and CBDG.
Okay.
And when would that be? And why wouldn't the Rules Committee make that determination when the committees rotate? I mean, why would staff do that?
I think we probably want our staff just to look at it and bring a recommendation. I mean, we wouldn't move it, my recommendation to move it in January, right?
I don't care.
So in the rules, so there's not a rule for this, so we have to make a rule,
Yeah.
which is, I guess,
Correct. So
what if we just said in January, because now we get to the budget, so they're a little bit busy, but in January, just as we do, or as I have done as a citizen committee member, we just vote, or if it's only two aldermen on there, if Alderman Rainey is finished, then you all on the committee just decide who goes next and make that schedule that we would give to staff. I mean, there's only three of them, right? And so, like on parking transportation, it's only myself, Alderman Nguyen, and Alderman Rebel. So,
Does
you want to take?
911,
Thank you.
there are two of us on 911.
oh, I don't know about
Do you want to
911.
rotate?
Yes,
Alderman Sufferman?
that's why I said it would require my recommendation.
I'd rather you take on.
I'd be happy to remember.
Right, but since, I guess my thing is, if we just do it in January, we all know who's on the committees with us, we can decide who's going to be the next chair and make a schedule to give to staff.
So I think what
That's just-
the reason that I said have staff look at it, Alderman Fleming, and what Alderman Nguyen was, so myself and Alderman Simmons sit on MWBE. The typical rotation would be every 6 months. So we would literally be rotating, which I would want to say probably every 2 years versus every 6 months would be my recommendation. And as well, I would want to fold into this, we have the Parks and Recs Committee that I think if we just allow staff to come back with the recommendations, looking and getting feedback from the current boards, that at our next meeting we'll be able to make a vote that makes sense, that we can put in place in January. So if that makes sense for my motion, then that's what I would put forward to vote on.
Alderman Wilson?
It's not a bad idea, but I just think that maybe what we do is we have each of the respective committees that are going to be doing this. We'll all be meeting before the first of the year.
Yeah.
They'll each be required to report back and make a suggested rotation schedule or protocol to the Rules Committee. Because each committee can, I guess, best address, like the one that has two, maybe you don't want to do every 6 months, maybe you want to do 1 year term, whatever it is. So that way each committee can do what's best for the respective committee, and we'll come back to the rules with those proposals.
Is everyone good with that?
It makes sense.
Okay. Or maybe even
Alderman Ravel?
can we come straight back to council instead of spending
Yes.
time on rules?
Yes.
So have that come back to council as opposed to rules.
Okay.
Make a motion, please.
Yeah, would someone, Alderman Ravel, did you want to?
Well, I just want to clarify. So I am the council representative on the Housing and Homelessness Commission, and it's a citizen is the chair of
That's
that. So we're
different.
not talking about that.
No.
Thank you.
Okay, so I move that with regard to the committees that we're talking about, that each of those committees prepare a proposed rotation schedule for the chairmanship and get that reported back to the council prior to the first of the year for adoption after the first of the year.
Perfect.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, that's great. Okay, let's try to get through the rest of this, if we can. The next item is Board, Commission, Committee conflicts of interest with members representing private interests before separate committees. Mr. City Manager?
Actually, I think you're at 11.
Oh, I'm sorry. Amend City Council rules to allow board yeah, this is important too. Amend City Council rules to allow board, commission, and committee members with expired terms to continue serving until a replacement has been placed. Alderman Wilson.
I think it's self-explanatory. I move that we advance this to council for adoption as a change in the rules to allow for the expired terms to continue until the replacement's appointed.
Is there a
Second.
second? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. Okay, now we're on, what are we on? 12?
Board Commission.
Right.
Conflict.
Board, Commission, Committee conflict of interest with members representing private interests before separate committees. Who is going to speak to this? Mayor Haggerty.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start this off. This ended up on the agenda from one of our prior city council meetings when we were talking about appointees to boards and commissions, and we had some discussion and said we'd bring it here for a discussion. So as the mayor, when I'm looking at vacancies to fill them, sometimes I'm presented with potential conflict of interest situations. So, as an example, one could be a professional that we're looking to put up who also does business in this city and is looking to come forward on some of those issues, not necessarily to the committee that they are appointed to, but to other committees, and how should that, be viewed? Again, my position as mayor is generally I go to Corporation Council and I have a conversation with them and say, okay, do we think there's a conflict of interest here? So to give you a real example there, it could be a situation where somebody's an attorney and, here in town and is representing or is currently representing somebody on the council, or maybe they have in the past, or maybe that's just something they could do in the future, and how should that be viewed? Another could be somebody that is up for consideration but is in the process of having a potential legal dispute. It could actually be a real one where they're part of a group or they filed a suit against the city or they're threatening to file a suit against the city. Another one could be the situation where it just came to me, this financial disclosure form that was filled out. There's a point here that it says a statement of whether you, your spouse, or any relative living with you owns property, receives any gifts or income, has an economic interest or association which creates or could give rise to a conflict of interest. So I'll use myself as an example here. So in the Harley Clark debate, there have been people that have said, I think the mayor's conflicted, even though I don't have a vote. The mayor's conflicted because he lives in close proximity to the mansion, and if that mansion is, demolished, and I think the mayor favors demolition, and by the way, I've always wanted to save the mansion. I just think private investment's the only feasible way to do that, and I've written extensively about that. But, if, people have said, hey, he should be, not involved at all in these proceedings, because if that mansion's demolished, then the value of his property will increase because there's more parkland. That's debatable. I have no idea if that's true or not. But that's just a couple examples there. So those are the sort of the real life questions that we discuss in my office when we're looking at people for different board positions. And I wanted to get some direction from the council on this. I'm sorry.
Okay, Alderman Wilson.
Thank you. I do think this warrants attention. I think that the way it's drafted currently, it's so incredibly broad that if we really took this completely literally, then everybody who's on a board or commission would be disqualified, and we would all be disqualified. It's a city of 75,000 people with a lot of businesses, including some large, like the hospital, university. I mean, if anybody's family member works for the university, arguably there's business being done with the city. It's a little bit too broad. So I think what makes sense is to maybe, with the assistance of the Corporation Council, to kind of adjust some of this to more of a disclosure and recusal type of direction and definition. It's just instead of just these broad across the board statements. I think we've got something that makes it almost impossible for somebody to, either A, make a living, or for, my kid was a lifeguard at the YMCA and he gets paid by the YMCA, or he did, but the YMCA provides programs to the city. So does that mean I'm out? I don't think it does, but we have to make sure that it's not too broadly drafted. So I think I guess the point is disclosure and recusal as opposed to disqualification.
Okay, anybody else? Alderman Fleming?
Yeah, I would agree with Alderman Wilson, except I guess my question as the legal department is going through this is if you have, the issue of suing or thinking of suing or whatever, maybe we want to flesh that out a little more. But if they do, say, sue us for whatever, do they, are they removed? Right, because so say if there's something that takes a long time, right, they're going to sue us and that can take whatever long. Probably best to remove them for the time and then have them come back if the board, can stand to have that vacancy or you can fill that vacancy versus sitting there and then meeting after meeting recusing yourself because you have a conflict. So I guess just be mindful of, excuse me, if it's something that's more of a long-term thing. Because, again, I don't want someone to not serve because they are making a living, but I think we just have to be cautious of that and make sure that person understands, if you're participating in whatever it is, we're going to ask you to recuse for a couple minute meetings or, step out until this matter is behind you and then you can come back on. So I would like this to make sure some language is in there because it doesn't make sense to have someone there every month recusing themselves if they're on a long-term project, so to speak.
Right, and that's... I think attention will have to be put on the direct and indirect as well. I'm an attorney. If I filed a lawsuit against the city, I would never do that. But if I did do that, then I would expect that would be a disqualifying act. Right. Or if I was seated and I filed a lawsuit against the city, then I would expect to not be any longer.
I have a question for our Corporation Council. Right now, remind me, does our ethics code even use the word recusal as an option under the code? I don't think it does. But I know that there are people who've gone for advisory opinions from the ethics board, and recusal has been a conversation.
That's correct. We've had a few individuals who have, as a matter of practice, they've recused themselves from presenting before a certain board or commission. So in practice, that has happened.
Right, but it's not in the code itself, I don't believe.
I would have to look at the code
Okay.
a little bit more in detail, but at first glance, I do not see the recusal term being used.
Okay, so I would agree with Alderman Wilson that our code we need to amend our code to provide that option in writing so that folks understand it. Mayor Haggerty?
I guess I still need more clarification or discussion. So let's take somebody in town who is an architect. That person serves on the Preservation Commission, and that person is representing a client here in town and wants to come before the ZBA, the zoning board. Is that a conflict of interest, and the person should either be told, hey, you can't take that work, or you have to step down from the board? I mean, those are the real issues that I'm confronted with, that we've talked about before. I mean, that example is a real example. And that was something that one of the public speakers, I think it was Mary Beth Burns, when she spoke at the beginning, was talking, in essence, I think, about that. Clearly, you can't come before the board that you're on and do that. That is a conflict of interest. I think everybody would agree with that. But it's your livelihood, you're an architect or you're a lawyer, can you be involved in another matter on a, city matter on a different board?
Alderman Ravel.
Well, I'll jump in. I think that doesn't sound to me like a conflict for them to be able to appear before a board that's independent of the one that they serve on.
Right.
The problem is we don't have anything written down. I mean, we need to.
Well, again, I mean, I think with the way, and our Corporation Counsel can chime in, the way that our rules are interpreted by our legal counsel right now, they would say that, yeah, that's a conflict. You can't be on, ZBA and then representing somebody on the plan commission. I mean, I've been told that before, and that creates some of the challenges. Another issue would be, what if take that same situation that it's an architect is doing work for one of us up here, okay, and is employed by one of us, and is on a board that we also serve on. Okay, that one of the aldermen, okay, is on, let's say, the Transportation Commission, okay, with this person, and this person is, in a business arrangement with the alderman, let's say, to do an addition to their home. Is that a conflict? Okay, and I'll play it out. I'll play it out for you. So the question is that Mary is an architect here in town. I am the 7th Ward Alderman instead of the mayor, so I have a vote. And Mary is working for my family, okay, doing an addition. Mary and I serve on the Transportation Committee together as an alderman. And, if you play it out, it could be, and again, I don't think these sinister things go on, but this is perception and everything else, that because there is money transferring between Mary and I, Mary is doing this architecture work, I am paying her, we also serve on this Transportation Commission. Hey, Mary, I really need your vote on this, okay? And so, Mary, so I can say, hey, look, Mary, I'm going to give you an extra $1,000 here on this job that you're doing for me. Okay, I'm just playing it out. Or vice versa. Mary says, man, Alderman, I really want you to support this, Alderman Haggerty, and how about I give you a little discount here and really come along. We laugh, you guys, but I'm telling you, this is what residents sometimes worry about.
Because that has nothing to do with either employment. That's outright bribe.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with the activity of either party. That's a bribe.
Right.
So take the bribe away, and just because one is doing a job for the other, and the bribe ruins the whole story.
Yeah, it begs the question, what do people do in towns much smaller than this, right?
The bribe ruins the story.
Yeah, so I would agree. I
Okay,
think we need to separate that from the discussion.
Well, I think
Alderman Nguyen.
Well, I think that, welcome to legal ethics as taught in law
101.
schools. It's all about these scenarios. So I think the essential issue is so how do we define the conflict? And so is it financial remuneration in some way or benefit in some way. So what's the benefit that could potentially happen? So because initially let's say there is a lawyer who serves on the Arts Committee, but who also represents clients in front of the ZBA. To me, that would not be a conflict. So because there's not a nexus of a financial benefit to the lawyer by serving on the Arts Committee. Now, obviously, if it's a client of the lawyers who wants to give or sell a piece of art to the city, then suddenly then that's where the nexus appears. So, so I'm trying, but obviously we also have to err in the direction of not even an appearance of a conflict. So I think we need to define the conflict issue a little bit better. I mean, my understanding would be that it's fiduciary or the appearance of it. I think that's what we all operate under up here. But you're right. These are really interesting questions. So, but if they're in a community this small, in the instance that you gave, is there a financial benefit going back and forth between the alderman and their architect via the Transportation and Parking Committee?
Okay, okay. Can we do Alderman Wilson and then Mr. Mayor?
That's how you end up sitting in most of your legal ethics.
And I think Alderman Nguyen just kind of dialed into one of the thresholds questions. We don't have clear discussion of appearance of conflict in the ethics. I think that appearance should not be dealt with as harshly as actual conflict. So again, that's that whole idea of the recusal, disclosure, and recusal. And disclosure might not require recusal. So the disclosure is just to let people know, hey, my kid's a lifeguard at the YMCA, and the YMCA wants to have a crosswalk, and I advocate for that crosswalk, but I'm not doing it because my kid gets a paycheck from the YMCA or used to, whatever. So parse that out, and do you kind of understand what we've all been bouncing around? You do, right? Do you feel like you have some direction on putting something together?
I do. This is a conversation that the law department has had, and I think that this has provided us a lot of great direction in terms of analyzing each and every situation, which we do diligently with all the facts given. So appreciate that.
So I would move that we direct the law department to do a draft revisions to the ordinance in line with what was discussed.
And come back to this committee.
Come back to the committee.
Is there a second to that, please?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? Okay, great. We're on number 13 now, trying to get through this. Review of election issues relative to filing deadlines and electoral board procedures. Yes, Mr. Clerk.
Okay. Yeah, let me start with this, Madam Chair, if it's okay. I ask that this be placed on the agenda. We're getting ready to have our November 6th vote coming up in a month, and as a candidate, and there were other people here in the community that 2 years ago went through this, including the city clerk. There were clearly some ambiguities and uncertainties in the law or the rules about when you have a primary and when you don't, and then there were protests that were made to try to remove many candidates from the ballot. I would like to see us task the cities, I'm not sure who the appropriate department is. I think it's probably the law department, to revise and update those to the extent that we can to basically avoid that situation from happening 2 years from now. I think it would be a complete embarrassment to all of us up here if we don't address that.
Agreed.
Okay.
So I move that we direct the law department to propose revisions to our code to avoid the debacle from a couple of years ago.
If I may chime in, there election code is set by state statute, so there really isn't anything within our code to change. The linchpin in that instance was whether or not Evanston is a nonpartisan city, and whether we have clarified that when we made the 1952 change to become a council manager, city manager form of government. So I think it's not to update our code, it's just to do research. And I've been looking at the minutes and the records books. They're all in my office from 1952 in particular, and haven't found anything that directly delineates whether we are a nonpartisan, whether we're nonpartisan or partisan.
And I think the general impression for more decades than maybe any of us can remember is that it's nonpartisan. So I guess whatever is required to lock that down so that we do have clarity. And I think that would be part of our own codes and ordinances.
Is that your motion then?
I move that we direct the law department, with the advice of the city clerk's office, to determine what's needed to have clear direction for candidates in the upcoming elections.
Second.
From here forward.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the last.
I think someone hit a light down there.
I can see the lights all here.
Okay.
And there's no one. Thank you.
If there's one matter relating to the election issues that has been raised, with the filing of the Hartley Clark referendum, and recently regarding whether it's the responsibility of the clerk's office to give legal advice to folks who are filing. Particularly, there's an instance with someone who filed an objection against the Hartley Clark referendum, and I think part of the reason that this is on the agenda today was because of confusion as to whether the clerk's office should have informed that person as to whether their address was properly listed on their objection. And I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that. Or
I think that's something that we can put on a future agenda.
I do want to.
Way over our time tonight.
Okay. Well, I just
and
do
it's
want.
not on our agenda for tonight. So
I think we all know
it
you're
is-
not supposed to provide legal advice.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Somebody
I've
else might
gotten
want that.
emails from members of the dais who, including CCing the objector, that make it seem as though it was the responsibility of this office. So I just wanted to tender to the council so there's a clear understanding here. I've spoken to the Chicago Board of Elections, the Illinois State Board of Elections, and the Cook County Board of Elections, three of the premier election authorities in the area, and they have all confirmed that that is the proper procedure. So I just want to make sure that folks on the dais understand that, and I'm not dealing with folks on the dais sending emails.
we can take this up at the next meeting.
Thank
It's
you.
not an agenda item. If there are people who want to speak to it, they should be noticed that we're going to be discussing this. Our last agenda item is old business, number 14, the lobby ordinance. Alderman Nguyen, could you take this?
Yes. Hi, Claire. Over several months ago, Ms. Kelly requested an opportunity to come before the Rules Committee when I was still chair to discuss or present materials on a lobbying ordinance. The last time we met was our August meeting, which was packed, and we only meet bi-monthly. So then the chairmanship has changed, and I told the current chair that this item needed to be brought up on the Rules Committee agenda. So I have my emails up, and Ms. Kelly had said that she had materials put together, and she would requested 10 minutes to present her materials on a lobby ordinance. And I had agreed to have her do that at a prior meeting. Actually, I agreed that we would do that and put it on the agenda. Then in August, the agenda was too full. And now the chairmanship has changed. So I think we should put it on our next Rules Committee meeting, because obviously this one was packed too.
Right, because I just heard, actually, because I did want confirmation from the chair, because I know how things can go. A chair could also say, no, it's packed. So I didn't hear actually from Alderman Fisk until Friday, and I was given about under an hour to upload, to send in documents, and I didn't even get the email. I was in the hospital with my mother until she came out from surgery, and I saw, I was supposed to upload materials. You emailed me at 12 to say to send in the materials by 1, and I'd been trying to ascertain who was chair since the beginning of September. So anyway, however, I do feel very strongly, obviously, that we do need to discuss and really seriously consider adopting a lobby ordinance. I know it's become an enormous industry in our country, and it can very much weaken the effectiveness of the institution of our city government, as well as weaken public trust, the effect of lobbying. I know Clerk Reed also understands the importance and the need for a lobby ordinance, and he has graciously offered to do a streamlined presentation if you just to get this. I just think we really need to get this in the works. I have been speaking with the Harvard, the Edmund Saffer Center for Ethics, and as well as the Center for City Ethics at the University of Indiana, and there are people there, experts who are willing to come and speak, but I couldn't tell them, I didn't want to ask them to set up time because I didn't get confirmation. So I don't know if we could just do a brief overview.
Well, I think that what we should do is get them, and I understand there was short notice, there was confusion. I was out of the country for a period of time. But I think what we should do is allot time for this, a 10-minute time for this at the next Rules Committee meeting, and have the documents in our hands beforehand so that we can review them and have an opportunity to be well versed on the issues. That's what I would recommend. At this point, we've now been meeting for 2 hours, and I think you probably don't want our brains addressing this right now.
Okay, but I would like timely notice, so if I could get confirmation, are you going to be chair, Judy? Next?
Yes,
Can you just email me and confirm so that I just don't want to spin my wheels, be working really hard, and can we have a guest speaker also?
When you asked for this to be continued from this meeting,
Never got a response either. Today, I asked you yesterday.
You were copied on
I did, and you simply said, can you apprise me as to the emails, but you didn't. You never got back to me and said it would be postponed. That's why I'm here tonight. So, I mean, I really haven't been afforded the sort of respect I would expect a resident. You never got back to me and said, yes, it's postponed, or no, it's not. So anyway, it's okay.
I think Alderman Nguyen has explained that you were to come back, or you were scheduled to come back at whatever, September or August meeting. My understanding from reading the minutes was that you were going to have documentation submitted by that time. I just assumed that because that was to be submitted for the September
I never
or
got
August.
confirmation.
It was September. I read the string of emails.
We didn't have a meeting in September.
Yeah, I read the string of emails.
So I'm just asking for some timely notification.
Right, and you've asked for a continuation, and Alderman Nguyen has agreed with that. And
you're the chair, so I need
I know, and
okay.
I'm going to finish speaking. So you will have 10 minutes at the next meeting. You can use that 10 minutes whatever way you want, whether it's to bring in an expert or speak, or whoever you want to speak. But that will be on the agenda for the next Rules Committee meeting.
And the date of the next Rules Committee is the first Monday in December?
That's correct.
And what is that date?
December 3rd.
December 3rd.
It's the second night of Hanukkah. I don't know if that means anything to anyone.
So you should send it in like a week ahead of time, just in case there's a
Right.
problem with
Yeah.
the PDF or whatever. Yeah, so.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Well, we got through the agenda, which was great, so thank you all very much. Alderman Ravel?
Just one quick item. I'd just like to, pursuant to Council Rule 2.6, I would like to say that I'll be asking the city manager to put an item on the agenda for our council meeting next Monday for us to consider a request from the Landmarks Illinois organization to allow access to the Harley Clark Mansion so they can prepare for the Preservation Commission meeting. It's just
No, she was just notifying you.
Shall I read you the count? The rule says committees or individual aldermen who intend to ask for official council action shall ask the city manager to put such matters on the printed agenda prior to the council meeting. So I will be asking the city manager to do that for us.
So I guess my question was just, do we need council approval to let somebody in a building?
The city manager doesn't feel he has direction from council to let anybody in the mansion. I want it to go to the council. Unless we want to direct him today to go ahead.
Put it on planning and development. You need to put it on.
Okay, so I second your request that it be put on the agenda.
It says I can put it on the agenda for a council meeting.
Okay, so yeah, that's seconded, so it'll be on the agenda.
Second. Is it a special order of business, or how does that?
Yeah, we'll do it as special
Okay.
order.
Okay. I guess I would like to add to that, I'd like the report of who, because I thought they had been in the house already, so history on that. Okay, is there a motion to adjourn? Okay. Human Services will begin in, 10 minutes, folks? Are you, Alderman Braith, I'm sorry, Alderman Fleming, 10 minutes is okay? 10 minutes. Okay, great.